The intellectual property that's sitting in some of these organizations is the lifeblood of these organizations. So if that's lost, then their value could tremendously come crashing down.
Ransomware is no longer an edge case. It's not a hypothetical. It's a common operating reality for organizations of every size. And yet, most conversations still focus on prevention, stopping the attack before it happens. What we see time and again, though, is that when prevention fails, recovery is where organizations truly struggle. Because getting data back doesn't automatically mean getting the business back. In the middle of an attack, speed, data integrity, and confidence matter far more than any single tool. Poor recovery doesn't just slow things down, it can reinfect an environment and extend the crisis well beyond the initial incident. So today we're reframing the conversation. I'm joined by Andrew Miller, lead principal technologist at Pure Storage and a longtime practitioner in storage and data protection, and Darren Gourley, who leads Pellera's work with clients on storage, recovery, and resilience. Together, they bring a rare combination of architectural depth and real-world recovery experience, shaped by what they've seen succeed and fail when ransomware moves from theory to reality. Welcome to Edge of IT.
Thank you for having me, and great to see you again, Darren.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it. I was reminiscing a little bit and thinking back to the days of, all right, when did I first started getting into the backup recovery and storage space? And it takes me back to Legato Networker. So, I'm sure a few listeners out there can remember Legato and Networker, and that was a de facto standard. I worked a lot on Unix systems and had to do many overnight recoveries of, swapping tapes and a lot of command line. We've come a long way.
I don't think I ever mentioned this to either of you, but we evaluated Networker as well as Tivoli Storage Manager. Hoped that Tivoli Storage Manager was simpler. Didn't work out that way, but then poured a lot of my life into Tivoli Storage Manager and Backup Exec and VMware Site Recovery Manager. And it's all cyber now. The whole landscape has changed, but there's some common foundations.
The way things are going, the only thing that is constant is that everything is changing. The ransomware has changed how we think about data protection. From a BCDR perspective, Andrew, how did we historically approach recovery, and help the listeners understand how that sort of a model falls apart?
I want to jump in the time machine. I actually go back to when I was out of college, and actually we lost power in our data center. Before that, actually, I'd already been given a responsibility for backups because no one wanted to run backups, right? Kind of thing. That's a classic junior thing, although they're important. And then we had a UPS tech that messed up the UPS servicing, and our data center lost power. So that's where I got then after that given the job of hey, come up with a data center recovery power order. And you start to think about, okay, what are all my dependencies in my data center and which has to come up in what order? And then later, as I kind of went further, you learn about, and hopefully this is setting the foundation for folks, but if you don't know this, dig into this area. You're thinking about RPO, how much data do you lose in the event of a disaster? RTO, how long does it take to come back online? You do things like a business impact analysis to go and talk to the business units and see how much cost there is, not projected cost, but actual real cost. And then you're thinking about recovery tiers. So that's the history of this, but those are built around acts of God, often from a disaster recovery standpoint, or often from if you're thinking about it from a backup and recovery standpoint, it's restoring, if maybe Sally in accounting or Bob in accounting, whoever, deleted a file. You need to bring back certain specific things, not, now you asked, so how does it fall apart in ransomware scenarios? Not am I dealing with malicious humans trying to break into my environment and do things, or am I dealing with having to restore large amounts of environment as quickly as I can? It's not a file here, a 5 or 10%. It might be how quickly, you might get asked this by your CIO, or already have been, how quickly can you bring back 50% of your environment? That's a very different challenge. And then we start to go into, and I'll pause here to, so I don't take the whole time, is we start to think about progress bars and iteration cycles. And if we have to recover multiple things, but then we have to back up, that's killer. So there's a commonality here of the building blocks. And I'm sometimes careful because it's not like all of this is new. It builds on previous concepts, but there's some key differences when it hits the fan. it hits the fan. There's real differences in how you need to think about it.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, Darren, from what you see, I mean, where do leaders typically overestimate their recovery readiness today?
Well, that's a great question, and one that could probably have multiple points here. I think one is, are you keeping up with what's happening at the current moment, right? This is a rapidly changing and very dynamic space. I mean, literally on a daily basis, new threats are coming in and new ways of threats are coming in. You don't have a recovery plan, you're overestimating the complexity and have gone through all of the steps involved with truly getting a good recovery. But if you don't have current technologies and aren't keeping pace with what the bad guys are doing, then your recovery processes may not work. And so don't overestimate how often you need to revisit your current practices, your current technologies, and continue to add appropriately in lots of different spaces. So traditionally, we've relied on backup software, right, as being the recovery point. And now we know that the storage can be heavily involved, right? Heavily involved from a recovery perspective and also from a preventative perspective, which we've seen a lot of companies take advantage of.
This actually makes me think of and this is a classic phrase, but because it's still true, is the idea of defense in depth. We have a multi-layered defense. We hope not to be at our last line of defense any given time, but inevitably, eventually the attacker will get there, not a question of if, but when. And so the data layer, whether that's backups, it's storage, et cetera, we call them cyber now, different terms. The data layer is key to that last line of defense.
Yeah, I mean, literally, there are layers to this game, right? How do partnerships and connected detection help organizations sort of connect those dots when things go sideways, when someone gets punched in the mouth?
I think I could say it's the Mike somebody quote, so somebody that we probably know. But the other one I think of there, I like to think of is that plans are worthless, but planning is essential. I think it's credited to Dwight Eisenhower. I'm sure someone on the internet will prove me that it's somebody else, and that's fine. But the quote's a good one. So within that, I like to channel a friend at Pure, Jason Walker, give him a little bit of a shout out, where he likes to talk about how this is a team sport. He's actually done like sports announcing in the past, kind of thing. So it works for him. And anyone who tells you, and this would be any company that I work for now or have in the past, or anyone else out there, that there's a single silver bullet for this, like we want this, we want these things to be easy, but there wouldn't be this huge industry, so many companies around if it truly was. So that falls apart pretty quickly. When we think about partnerships and even connected detection, the core layer, and if we're thinking our stacks here, last line of defense, which is often the data protection or the data, the storage level, needs to be solid. This would be around having things like immutability or indelibility, which are sometimes just fancy words for an attacker can't get in and modify the data protection methods, or he can't destroy them, because that's functionally the same thing. If you destroy the backups, it doesn't matter if you couldn't modify them, if you can destroy them, or the snapshots, et cetera. And you need to have these as more modern approaches that don't have the classic trade-offs around performance and speed of recovery, et cetera.
Wait, can you unpack that for me a little bit? There's a difference between immutability and what was
indelibility?
The other one? And indelibility. Are they both cryptographically protected, or?
So in this case, what I mean, and there's value to the meanings, is immutable says once you've taken a data protection point, a backup, a snapshot, et cetera, someone can't modify it from an external method. They can't actually make any changes to it, kind of thing. That might be a fancy word for read-only, but potentially in a data protection or cyber recovery context. Indelible is often the idea, and there may be other terms for this, is what if someone gets administrative access? Heaven forbid, but there's actually a real story here of an admin who went on vacation. The day after he went on vacation, the attackers deleted the backups and the snapshots because they'd pushed a keylogger onto his machine from the help desk. Ooh, that's not bad on him per se, but what if someone gets admin access? Can they destroy the means of data recovery, destroy and delete the snapshots or the backups? And protections against that would be often what we're using the term indelible.
Darren, curious, what's your perspective on this, right? I mean, how important are these different integrations?
It's critically important, right? I mean, and I'll tell you from a partner perspective, our customers don't always think or operate this way. And quite often, we're the ones bringing these teams together within a customer ranks, right? The security team, the infrastructure team, the backup or data protection team, and having them sit down at the table and having these discussions. From a prevention perspective, as I stated earlier, it's not only on the security side, it's not only with the identity and access management, for instance, it's also done at the storage layer with all sorts of threat detection and anomaly detection, basically trying to identify if something doesn't look right, right? Something doesn't look right within our environment, something's acting and behaving much differently than normal. And when that happens, we're going to go do something. We're going to cut off access. We're going to notify individuals. We're going to set off some sort of process that hopefully protects us. But it all still comes back to the plan. The plan as a whole involves everyone. When you sit down at what you call it a football, right? You have all the players in a huddle, right? And you call a play. But each player has a different responsibility. Some block, some go out for a pass, some hand it off for throw, some run. You have different plays. It's very similar, right? But if you didn't have a huddle and they just talked the ball to the quarterback, they wouldn't quite know what to do, right? Some would block down the field and it's actually a pass and then you get a penalty. So it's a true team effort and that needs to be approached. And the reason it's become really important is data is so much more valuable now than it ever has been, right? And so that's critically important. It's regulatory and compliance requirements. And so again, having everybody on the same page and building out a plan and understanding what each other's responsibilities are is really important. Because if an attack does happen, if it happens in the middle of the night, half of your security team could be at a conference. Half of your data protection team could be on PTO. And so without a plan to go through and execute, you may not have all the players in the place that you want them. So that's part of it as well. It's pretty chaotic and there can be chaotic. So some of that chaos can be calmed down quite a bit by having a plan, and not only having a plan, but practicing, right? And practicing some sort of recovery. And that's critically important.
There's a term that I want to highlight. I can almost, it's like, ooh, is he going to say it? But so I'll say it, is the idea of a tabletop exercise where you actually sit down and like the idea of a tabletop and you actually are going through the different phases of an attack and a recovery. I participated in this at Pure actually I'm not in an IT operational role here, but as an observer. So the idea of actually having formal consulting arrangements with companies like Pellera to be able to do tabletop exercises to walk you through those phases and have attack injections, et cetera. You know, for example, one was how do you handle the attacker being in the Zoom listening to you while you're recovering? Like, seems maybe simple as soon as you think of it, but maybe you didn't because people are at 2 a.m. in the morning and they're in pajamas. Well, you probably need to flip video on and make sure that people are who they say they are.
These types of attacks can just be paralyzing. It get damage to your business, damage to your reputation. My first time in Vegas was when one of the major casinos got hit. And I remember walking around the floor and just seeing all these blue screens of death, not being able to, get a reservation for dinner, having to pay for dinner in cash. It was definitely noticeable that something had occurred. I mean, Darren, can you share any, stories from your experience where you saw things go bad or you saw things go well? I'm curious.
Former company of mine that I worked for had a customer that was a very large healthcare organization, and we were notified that they had a ransomware attack. And they notified us that, hey, everything's at a standstill. We're under ransomware attack. And very few details came out. We were just notified. But as time went on, we started to understand that they actually were turning away patients at their hospitals because they could not do any sort of intake or processing. So it can be very drastic. And this was a health organization that had hundreds of hospitals. Basically, I think for about a week or two, the hospitals were closed. Then they had manual operations where they could actually get them back up and running. But it took them 6 to 8 weeks to get back up and operational, where things were at least up from a system standpoint. The brand damage that it does, right, especially to the local communities that rely on these hospitals for healthcare, is unmeasured, right? You trust and you hope when you go to the hospital, you can get the care that you need, and to be turned away, I'm not sure you're going to go back, quite frankly.
There's the brand damage in that respect, but also just the personal trauma of, showing up to the ER and, oh, so sorry. I can't even imagine. When the team finally stabilizes things and they start digging into recovering, I mean, what does that look like? How does architecture affect the transition to getting back to where you need to be?
After the attack happens, you've got an incident response team internally, or maybe with a Pellera or another company that's actually trying to figure out how the attackers got in and what they got access to. And they may be finding that out over time as you're trying to restore. So you may have to do one restore and then redo that restore to clean out something else, and then do it again to clean out something else. So if you're having, the key there is avoiding, if some of your restore processes look like they may have long progress bars involved, think about how to avoid that. And there are more modern ways to do that, whether it's metadata driven or crazy amounts of bandwidth.
I'd like to respond by, first off, architecture to me always matters, right? And you got to make those choices. But I would like to throw out that even before you get to architecture, there's some critically important steps that customers need to take, right? And it starts with some sort of a risk assessment and some sort of business impact analysis, because a lot of that gets to, as Andrew stated earlier, what your objectives are, how quickly you need to recover, and not just what, but how quickly. That's the time perspective. So that's where we talk about a plan needs to be put in place, but it's tied to some sort of business outcome or business tie to it. So once that's established first, then we start to go through and decide from an architecture perspective what technologies are truly needed and how many and at what location, even down to the detail of which applications need what. Because in some environments, especially in the enterprise space, they have thousands of applications, right? And if you say, yeah, we need to recover everything all at once, that's nearly an impossible task. So it's like, all right, let's get this down to which ones are the most critical and how quickly do we need to recover those? And then what's the size? How much capacity are we talking about? And that's where the architecture matters, because there's in some cases, right, where certain technologies won't support those requirements. And it forces us to go to something that actually will support those.
One thing that's fascinating is as we've matured here as an industry, we start to see commonalities. So one that I think of is the idea of a minimum viable hospital. So like in the healthcare space, like you said, Darren, I mean, every hospital is somewhat different, but there are similar building blocks. There are only so many HR providers, et cetera. So going to the idea of what you mentioned, like, what's the minimum stuff we need? What are some templates that can accelerate our starting point?
Yeah. I mean, things just keep changing. Like you said, data is just absolutely so critical now more than before. An organization's internal knowledge, it's their IP, it's their liability. We're playing devil's advocate here. Why should they be designing for now as opposed to waiting until things calm down with this whole AI thing, right?
There's no lack of projects. There's never enough time. There's more year than there is budget. All of these, yeah. I mean,
if it's not one thing, it's another.
Admin to architect to engineer as a customer for a while, and I never had enough time and I never had enough budget, et cetera. Where I think about there is doing tabletop exercises as a way to help clarify what matters, kind of thing. Because you can say like, oh, I know this matters, but there's so much here, I don't really know where to go. So that's a variation of what you were saying earlier of it's business impact analysis, it's tabletop exercises, going through and actually understanding at a larger business level. What I do also think there sometimes about the people, maybe within that, then there's a couple maybe random items that I'll throw in, anecdotes, is during a recovery process, thinking about the people and the organizational impact. I've seen cases where this is like the most stressful time of people's lives. And if you haven't prepared enough, you may have people that end up quitting or leaving before or afterwards, just like the stress is too high. And this isn't saying like people are quitters, just like this is incredibly hard stuff. The two other pieces are, I think, of the idea of, as a business leader, your CIO, your CFO listening to this maybe, or you're sending this to your CIO or CFO. How do you grapple with the idea of a threat that literally has an existential risk to your business? Usually it's a level of, okay, here's the level of risk. Here's what we should roughly spend to mitigate that risk. But these are attacks that have put businesses out of business. And so I don't have a silver bullet here, just like we said before in another context, but it is a different level of risk here, and therefore at least worth digging in at the initial level I was putting, because if you don't, it could literally put you out of business.
When it comes to why they should stay current, or addressing the why even address this issue. So I'm going to go back in time. I used to support a university, South Bend, Indiana. That kind of gives away who that might be. This was, 25 years ago. And at that time, ransomware wasn't even a real thing, but the term hacker absolutely was, right? We talked back and forth, and I said, where are you spending most of your time? And I was working directly with a lot of the Unix admins. They were like, we spend an inordinate amount of time securing our systems. And I was like, really? What's going on? They said, we get hacked on a daily basis from all over the world. And I said, so what are they doing? And he's like, they'll hack in our system and leave a note and say, we hacked your system. Right? That was the game, right? It was just this little cat and mouse game, but they never really went in there and did much damage. It was just, hey, we just did it. And so that was the case. So that was 25 years ago. That is no longer the case now. We're not having people break into systems and leave a note and say, ha. And the reason is because their data has tremendous value, right? Now we have people that are doing this for a money-making adventure. The intellectual property that's sitting in some of these organizations is the lifeblood of these organizations. So if that's lost, then their value could tremendously come crashing down. We've already talked about regulatory and compliance needs, right? And that ability to show that you're not only protecting, but you can recover and you have practiced your recovery. That is one of the questions when they go in and do an audit is, when's the last time you actually practiced the recovery of your systems? And so all of those things amount to, you need to have the right tools in place. You need to have the right softwares and technologies in place to do things appropriately.
As we wrap this up, Darren, do you have any stories for us on how we've helped clients, or how a tabletop exercise helped the client down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. It is truly a collaborative approach within Pellera, right? As a systems integrator, we have security experts, we have infrastructure experts, and those infrastructure experts are part of the, maybe networking experts, storage experts, data protection, or backup recovery experts. It starts with that business side, right? It starts with some sort of, governance conversation. We follow the NIST protocols, if you will, that are clearly stated out there, that of what they suggest companies should do when addressing their data and recovery and things like that. It's steps through a lot of the things that I said. It's some sort of a risk assessment, a business impact analysis. It's really doing a lot of, interviewing, if you will, with all the players, right? Security, infrastructure, networking, everything, of what their objectives are, right? What are the most critical applications, things like that. So since it touches both worlds, right, it's really critical that you have a partner that you can work with that has expertise on both sides as well. Of course, we can go deep dive on the security side more if they feel that data protection and storage has already been addressed, and vice versa. Sometimes we just have customers that, hey, we've already done the security side. We went through this last year, but we didn't get to the other side. Okay, well, then that's what we'll help with and focus. So it's really adaptable.
I'm hearing, Darren, that you put the custom in customer. Is that what I heard?
Oh my gosh, there we go. Yes. How did I miss that? That was a great opportunity for me to wrap up.
Thanks for leaving the softball for me.
Well, I think that's, that is the DNA, right? As a customer-focused organization, we are focused on what their needs are, right? Not what ours are. And so we're always looking out for the best solution that fits into their environment and their current situation. Well, gentlemen, this has been an incredible conversation. Truly appreciate you taking the time. Any last thoughts that you wanted to put out there?
I think I'll do a little bit of a highlight. As Darren mentioned, we've been trying to be true to our practitioner ourselves kind of thing, but there is some really interesting stuff. At some point, reach out to your peer teams where we think clearly about where we sit in the stack. I think about how we can do more with analyzing the data with better detection. I spent a lot of time recently thinking about exfiltration. That's a really hard challenge. Attackers taking the data out and even moving further up the stack with data protection and mobility methods and further partnerships. There's a lot of investment going on in this space, which is why, candidly, I could talk about it from an industry standpoint because we're thinking about how we solve for this. And there's literally a whole team of cyber resilience architects that can actually work with our customers. It's a team of like 15 folks. They roll up to Scott Taylor in the US. So I've intentionally tried to stay more industry focused, but we think about this a lot from a product and feature and capability side that good solutions integrators, hello Darren, can pull together into a more holistic solution and that actually is responding to what we're seeing in the industry landscape.
I just wrap up. I call it the 3 Ps, right? Partner, plan, and practice. Partner with the right people, right? Partner with a strong systems integrator or systems integrators, right? Partner with the right manufacturers or OEMs of the technologies. Put a plan together, right? A strong recovery plan. And the most critical part is practice that plan.
Thank you. I want to give a huge thank you to Andrew and Darren for such a thoughtful and grounded conversation. While ransomware may start as a data protection issue, when it happens, it quickly becomes something much bigger. It becomes a business issue, a brand issue, and ultimately a trust issue. When recovery falters, organizations don't just lose time. They risk losing customer confidence, partner relationships, and long-term credibility. That's why preparedness can't live in a single team or tool. Effective recovery demands a holistic approach that brings together security, infrastructure, governance, and leadership into a shared recovery strategy. It requires testing assumptions, aligning roles, and making sure every player knows how they contribute when pressure is highest. Because in the moments that matter most, recovery isn't just about restoring systems. It's about preserving trust. If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And to learn more, visit us at Pellera.com. Thanks for listening.